Hi, Marceline.
Hello, hi there, Deborah.
I see persons coming in. How are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I am I'm okay. That's the um that's the right response, but also I am tired. I've been doing a lot.
Okay, that's good. Wonderful, wonderful.
Good evening, gentlemen. How you doing? Oh, let me put this up on screen.
Hey guys, good night.
Good night, Alvin.
Hi, good night.
There's my share screen option. Um, Give me a second. Alden, you needed the passcode in order to get in?
It was a different profile. I just switched over to this one and then it went through.
Oh, I
Pass.
get you. I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it based on how I set up the Zoom meeting, you probably would need the passcode if you weren't one of the invitees.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Me, let me
Good.
check on that. All right, so I have for you. I haven't heard from the others. Um, Let me just mention that we've started.
Hey, night everyone.
Good night, Jamar.
Hey, David. Graham, the big man. Long time I hear from the G.
Okay, so I'm just going to allow 2 minutes to see if anybody else wants to come on. I think this is being recorded. Let me confirm that. And then we can get into it. All right, so it is being recorded. In the meantime, let me put this on screen. And I perhaps want to change this view. One second. Did Marceline drop off?
Yeah, I think she did. I'm going to call my friend. I think she's also in the group and see if she can join.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't necessarily expect that everybody will be able to join these sessions. The point really is to have these sessions and then for us to be able to talk most likely one-on-one through the individual sessions.
All right. So and then we'll still have the recording for this even
Y-
after, right?
yes, yes, yes.
All right. Yeah, man.
All right, so I'm going to go full screen and we'll be starting officially. All right, so good evening again, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this journey. Really, this initiative that I'm calling Personal Financial Makeover is really born out of a need. It's something that I've been observing in the conversations that I've been having with persons who I normally talk finance with. Um, it seems that even though we are earning more, and even though it seems like Jamaica's macroeconomic condition is improving, we're still having financial issues. So I wanted to create this group to really share some of the insights that I would have realized from those conversations, as well as from my own personal experience. Um, so it would allow me to share those insights with persons, and then for us to, as a group, really combine our mental horsepower towards the end of, say, achieving better financial stability, improving our financial condition, and then ultimately creating that space for um, financial stability and holistic financial well-being. So this course is kind of focused on five main pillars of personal finance. There is the the income pillar, there is the expense pillar, where we'll also talk about budgeting, we'll talk about investing, we'll talk about insurance, and also how we can build out our asset bases, looking at all the different types of assets. This would be going from the normal stocks and unit trusts and so on, to going over to the more nascent assets. So like using intellectual property, cryptocurrencies, looking at how you can acquire bullion, so like gold coins, silver coins, etc. And perhaps even looking at how we can acquire other real assets, so real estate, land, raw land, and perhaps even crude oil. So let's get into it. So for this initial module, we're looking at three main things. The first one is really to understand the importance of personal finance management. And we'll talk about how we do that, which is, one second, I see a message in the chat. Oh, good night, Monifa. And I also saw Kimberly. Good night. Forgive me for that. Um, Right. So for this module, we're really talking through effectively the introductory stuff. We're covering the core basis for this program. And if for those who are just coming in, I would have mentioned the whole point of this is really for me to share a lot of the insights and the information that I would have gathered through my own experiences, as well as through the conversations I would have had with persons. I know some of us are a lot more adept in terms of our financial information. What we're going to be really seeking to do throughout the next 5 or 6 weeks is how we can convert that information into actionable intelligence that we'll use to improve our financial condition. So the first objective for this module is for us to understand why it's important for us to take personal finance as a critical aspect of our holistic well-being. Next, we want to look at how we can assess our current financial situation. And then we're going to talk about how we set and achieve financial goals. Well, really, we're looking at how we set achievable financial goals. So those two things are different. So initially, I would have asked in the um the questionnaire that I sent out first, for us to list our financial goals. And for some of them, they were pretty clear, but some of them I could see where some work needed to be done to convert those financial aspirations into actionable goals. So let's look at the first pillar, which is understanding the importance of financial management. So personal finance or personal financial management is important for us for a number of reasons. Oh, and whilst I'm going through, um, oh, I didn't get those questions. Oh, you're sure? I think they were in the initial Google form that was sent out. I can access it and then see what was shared for each person. But again, those goals are things that we're going to tackle in the individual session. So I'll share the Zoom link at different times, and persons can also book the sessions over the next 6 weeks or so. Through the calendar that I will share in the follow-up email to this session. So, going back to the importance of personal finance management, it it's important because it's going to help us in terms of how we achieve financial stability. One of the most important benefits I can personally attest to getting out of taking my personal financial management more seriously is a reduction in the amount of stress that I face as it relates to finance. And of course, it helps us in terms of how we plan for our future. So a lot of us have stated our financial goals and having a very clear understanding of where we are and charting a path forward will help us in terms of how we actually realize those goals. So let's look at how we can get the initial picture. So before we can chart a path to any destination, we want to first understand what is our current situation. Where are we starting from? And there are a few things that we can do in order to get that picture. The first one, of course, is for us to calculate our net worth. And that's relatively easy to do. We'll walk through the steps as to how we do that. Another one that we can do, but this takes some amount of time, is for us to track our income and expenses. Typically, I would suggest to persons to track their expenses for at least 2 months. You can go three if you want to get somewhat of an understanding of the variation in your expenses from month to month. If you run your own business, then your income will also probably fluctuate month over month. And so that allows you to kind of establish that baseline, get that average, and then from there, you can see what are the key metrics that play into both your income and your expenses. And we can track from there, we can project from there where we want them to be, say, at the end of a 6 month period or at the end of a year. Another thing that is extremely critical is for us to identify our financial strengths and our financial weaknesses. So I can tell you from my perspective, again, one of my financial weaknesses is that I spend obsessively on books. So one of the things that I buy almost compulsively are books, especially like business related books, investing books, and so on. I recently got into reading biographies. And so now, anytime a notable individual puts out a biography, I want to jump and buy it. But I still have to, I do have a budget for my continuing professional education. And so that's about 2 or 3% of my monthly income. And so I have to kind of work in where and which books do I buy at what point. But if you leave it up to me, almost every other week I will be at the shipping company collecting books. So it's something that I'm trying to get a handle on. And this applies, by the way, to audiobooks as well. So that's one of my financial weaknesses. I guess a financial strength for me is that outside of books, I don't really spend impulsively on anything. I also tend to do a pretty good job. This is from my own self-assessment. I tend to do a pretty good job in tracking my expenses, and I have a really good intuition around the cost of things. So I tend to differentiate between the price of something and the cost of the thing. So as an example, if I'm going to buy a book, and I'll use that example, I'm not only looking at the sticker price of the book on Amazon. I'm also going to look at the fact that I'll need to ship the book here. And what's that shipping cost going to be? I'll also go as far as to add in the transportation costs associated with going to actually collect the book. Now, I don't go as far as to actually calculate um, opportunity cost. So like what's my time worth in terms of going to get the book as opposed to having it delivered to me and so on. I'm not that um I'm not so much of a stickler for it. I really just focus on the actual cash outlay that I have to deploy in order to really get this item in my hands. And it's the same thing for services that I might use. And of course, one of the other things that I do, being analytical, is that I will tend to track and graph my progress. So I'll track and graph my monthly expenses month over month. And in fact, I use that to calculate my own personal inflation. So I know, for example, that 3 months ago, my internet bill was $5,000 flat. Now it is 5,700 and something. So that is looking at around a 10 to 12% increase. So that's true inflation that I am calculating for my expenses. So let's look at some financial self-assessment tools. A few of them you might be familiar with. So for example, there are budgeting apps. I will share a few of those. There is also an expense tracking spreadsheet. I've developed one, so I'll also be sharing that as a resource for you guys to use. And one of the assignments coming out of this session is going to be for you to, one, get familiar with a budgeting app. I will share a few and you can choose the one that best suits you. Well, just play around with it really is the assignment, because we're going to look at income and expenses in a separate module. And in the output of that module is going to be the actual tools that you will use to track your expenses over the next 6 weeks to start. And then as we go through the full program, which could be 3 to 6 months, then you will be able to really use those tools and get a really accurate picture of what your financial situation is. The next thing is that we can look at financial planning software. And I won't go as far as to use QuickBooks, but this will apply to persons who run their own businesses. So there are different software, whether they be CRMs or budgeting or accounting tools like AdPack or sorry. So you can use AdPack or you can use some of the other accounting software that are out there for the management of your business. Okay, so I would have started out mentioning the importance of setting financial goals. And there are three ways that we can look at a financial goal. One is we can look at it in terms of an income. So we can set an income goal. We can also set an asset goal. So do we want our total assets to be at a certain point, or we want our net worth to be at a certain point? And then we can also set expense goals. So these could be looking at how do we reduce our expenses, or how do we spend more smartly to optimize our expenses. And again, that is something that we're going to talk about when we look at tracking our expenses and optimizing those. So a quick example here, if, for example, you use a credit card, you can optimize expense in the sense of using the credit card to a limit of, say, 30% of what the credit card limit is. And you can use that to pay like a regular bill. So, for example, in my case, um, my utility bill is on JPS's what's it, the prepay thing. Um, so I can use a credit card to pay to top up my utility bill. I can also use it to pay my flow bill. And so I can basically control that expense and gain rewards at the end of the year. So if I'm paying $5,000 a month at the end of a year, that's $60,000 that I would have spent on the credit card. And also I would have paid that back. But for each of those expenses, you are acquiring, whether it be rewards points or loyalty points in the case of if you're buying goods and services from listed companies, because the JSE has a loyalty card that allows you to get reward points as you spend with different listed companies. So in terms of setting your financial goals, you want to look at how you define your short-term goals as well as your long-term goals. And so most of the asset goals can fall in the long-term goals. So whether it is you want to build up your equity portfolio to, say, $1 million, or you want to acquire a first or second property, those are kind of long-term goals. Short-term goals could be you want to increase your income by 10%, 15% over the next 6 months or by the end of the next 3 months. It could also mean adding, one second, need to plug this in. Right. So it could also mean adding to your current equity holding. So if a perfect example of a goal would be, I buy 1,500 shares of Grace Kennedy by the end of September 2025. That's a measurable goal, which is taking me to the second point. It's specific. I have stated exactly what I want to buy and what amount, so I can measure it. Um, is it achievable for me? That's kind of subjective based on my income level. Is it relevant for what I'm trying to do? Typically, you measure relevance by whether or not it plays into your longer term goals. And then is it time bound? So yes, it has a timeline on it, which is the end of September 2025. And so I know that that's a goal that somebody can keep me accountable to. So if it is that on a monthly basis, I can only afford to buy 100 Grace Kennedy shares, it might mean that I need to stretch a little bit more in order to achieve the goal of purchasing the 1,000 shares by the end of September. And somebody can look at me at the end of July and say, okay, you said you wanted to acquire 1,000 shares of Grace Kennedy. How much did you buy in June? How much did you buy at the end of July? Where are you? And so that allows me to kind of keep abreast of the goal, tracking it to the point of attainment. The other thing that we want to do is we want to prioritize our goals and create an action plan. And I kind of spoke to that just now in terms of creating the action plan. So the typical goal setting process looks like stating what you want and putting a deadline to it. That's a typical goal setting. There is a step beyond that. And the step beyond that really is looking at all the things that you would need to do. It's basically the plan towards achieving the goals. So it would detail, the project managers here would know this. So when you're setting up, when you set a goal, you have intermediate steps on the way towards the achievement of that goal. And you can put that on a Gantt chart to see, okay, these are the things that will need to happen within these specific timelines for this goal to be achieved by the deadline. Another thing that the project managers will tell you is that you need to know account for the resources that you need in order to achieve that goal. So, as an example, for me, a resource that I would definitely need if I'm just starting out on my equity portfolio is that I would need to create an equity account. So that will be a task on the list of things that need to happen in order for this goal to become reality. And then in terms of prioritizing your goals, that one is also very subjective. My personal opinion on prioritization of goals is this. You want to select the goal that is going to have the single biggest positive impact on you. So it might not be the most ambitious goal. It might not be the easiest goal to achieve, but my process of prioritization puts the goal that is going to have the most significant positive impact on me as goal number one. And sometimes that goal is something that is not necessarily material in the sense that you might not have a physical thing to show for it at the end of that, once you would have achieved that goal. And a perfect example of this might be going to therapy or attending church. So why do we set financial goals? I'm sure by now you would have seen why it's important to set them, just from the exposition that I've given earlier. But the most important one is that it provides direction and purpose. We are doing all of this to improve our financial condition, to improve our financial situation, and set us up for long-term financial stability. That's where we're trying to get to. So we definitely need a sense of direction. We need that purpose. And through setting our goals, we can achieve just that. It will also naturally help us to track our progress and, of course, to stay motivated. I always tell persons to celebrate your small goals. A friend of mine has a process. So he sets 10 goals every year. And how he sets his goal is that each of them cascades into each other. So, for example, when he was pursuing his PhD, one of his goals was to write one paper per semester. Then the immediate goal after that was to present at 2 conferences. The next goal after that was to get published in 2 or 3 research journals. And so once he achieved goal number 1, it logically led to goal number 2 and was a big contributor towards the achievement of goal number 2. And he was able to do that and actually achieved his PhD in record time. I think he did it in under 3 years, which was one of the fastest that we've seen at the time in the Department of Physics. Another thing that setting financial goals, another benefit that we'll get from it is, of course, is that it will improve our financial decision making. The good thing about having a direction and having a very clear end in mind is that it enables us to combat the impulsive decisions that we might make. So, for example, if my goal was to become one of the top 10 shareholders in a junior market company, I can tell you that it would greatly reduce my tendency to spend impulsively on books. What I will be focusing on and tracking is how much shares of a company am I acquiring on a monthly or on an annual basis. So we talked about getting that snapshot of where we are and using that to kind of chart the path forward. One of the steps I would have mentioned is how we calculate our net worth. And this is fairly simple. the steps are really to record all our assets and to value them. So record the value of your stocks. You have appliances, whether it's furniture or digital devices. You can also add intellectual property if you have that. You want to include the net value of your home or any property that you have, any real property that you have, the net value of your vehicle, land, cash on life insurance policies or unit trust values and so on. So once you have all the list of your assets, the next side of the equation is to find out all of your liabilities. So your loans, contractual expenses, things that you have to pay for, and things that really take money out of your pocket every month. Those would be, excepting your normal bills. These are your liabilities. And the formula for your net worth is simply to subtract the value of your liabilities from the value of your assets. So it's assets minus liabilities, and that gives you your net worth. I see the question. I'm going to come to it because we're almost done. All right, I'll just take it now. Calculate mine without life insurance. Okay. And you can do that. That actually helps. The reason I mentioned using the value of the life insurance is because most life insurance policies have, and it depends because you can set it up without it, but they do accumulate cash value based on the investment portion of it. I think for some policies, they're now subtracting out administrative expenses. I think I've seen it for Sagicor and Guardian. But for the most part, that is a minimal percentage of your premiums that you're paying. And if you do have the investment portion tied into that policy, then that will accumulate over time. And so without even using the value of the policy, there is a portion of it that can count towards your assets. And when you're applying for a loan, there are some financial institutions that will actually ask you to provide the policy identification number as well as any any cash value or any investment value that would have accumulated on the policy to date. So they use it. So perhaps we should as well. Now, in terms of how we track the different elements of either income, expenses, or assets, there are a few ways we can do it. We can use manual tracking, and as I mentioned, I will share a worksheet that I developed for the purpose of doing that. It will cover your income and expenses as well as your net worth. So it will look at every single aspect of assets that you might have. You can also use apps or different software. So for example, Why You Need a Budget, YNAB is one of the budgeting apps. Every dollar is a US version of a really good budgeting app. And every dollar is a Jamaican version of that was developed by one of my colleagues at the company that I work with. There's also Good Budget and there's Money Lover. I've used Money Lover in the past. It's a really, really good one because it allows you to itemize your expenses by nature. So you can put rent or mortgage, you can put gas, you can put transport fares, etc. You can even create categories. So for example, I don't have a pet, but if you have a pet and you're spending on pet medication or pet food, that's a column that you can actually create in Money Lover. And then of course you want to regularly review your income sources. Expense tracking is pretty similar. You want to start by categorizing your expenses. So you're looking at the big categories. This is an easy way to create a budget, by the way. But we'll delve more into budget creation in the next session. But an easy way to do it is to look at the big expenses, the ones that you know you definitely have to spend on a weekly or monthly basis. So for example, gas for the car, insurance, which is something you pay annually or every 6 months, depending. Um, Food, housing, whether it be rent or mortgage, those are the big ones. And then you have the smaller ones like entertainment, which you kind of have to track more carefully in order to get an accurate picture of what those expenses really looking like, are really looking like. Similarly, we can use tools for this. So we can use the budgeting apps, or we can use a spreadsheet. And we want to regularly review and adjust this as well. I spoke briefly about financial strengths. So here are a few of them. So persons who have a really high positive cash flow at the end of the month. So if you're earning 500,000 per month, but you're realistically on average only spending 300,000, you have 200,000 in discretionary income. That's a really significant financial strength. It will also dovetail into having a high savings rate. And also, if you have a low debt to income ratio, or another ratio would be a low debt to total gross income ratio. Right, so I was supposed to put this graph here. So in terms of I think I missed the financial weaknesses. Right. So the opposite of these will create the financial weaknesses. So if you have a high debt level, if you're having if you have an irregular income stream, and this could apply to persons who own a business or who work on a contractual basis. And of course, the lack of an emergency fund. These are all notable financial weaknesses. And one of the first things that we want to do when we start to assess our financial position is to detail, so create a pros and cons list to list out what are our financial strengths and what are our financial weaknesses, so that we can know which ones can we leverage to improve our situation. And then if we have weaknesses, what steps, what methods what strategies can we put in place to address those financial weaknesses? And then, of course, the last, I think this is the last slide, but the next step for us, having gathered this information, really is for us to, one, so this is what we'll be doing for the next meeting. We're going to assess our current financial position. So what does that mean? For each of us, I want us to try as best as we can to get a sense of our net worth. So note as many of your financial liabilities that you can name, and also your financial assets, and just get a number in mind, or a range of a number. What you really want to know is it positive or is it negative? And then we're going to set some smart financial goals. I'm going to challenge you to create 3 smart financial goals. So what does that mean? They must meet the 5 criteria that we mentioned just now. They must be specific, they must be measurable, they must be action oriented, they must be realistic for your situation, and they must each have a timeline. And then I've already spoken to the tools and strategies that we're going to use. And the ongoing monitoring is the other thing that we'll be doing as we go through this process. The benefits of effective financial management will show themselves over time. You will see increased savings levels. You will see a reduction in your debts, and you will unearth better investment opportunities as we proceed through this program. So that's basically it for this session. I'm going to create a new session just for the purposes of the question and answer. And we can discuss each of the points that I would have shared as it relates to this module. So we'll also look at the key points, which is one, you want to get an understanding of where you are financially. You want to